first of all, good afternoon to everyone. I want to welcome all of our wonderful non-public partners, and a special welcome, of course, to Joanne Hoffman's entire staff in the non-public office for the work that you do every day that supports students who are currently served in our non-public day and or residential settings. My name is Gwendolyn Mason. I'm the Acting Associate Superintendent for the Office of Special Education. And we had the pleasure of meeting several weeks back when we talked about the fact that on this day, we would have the opportunity to present to you information that will help you to understand the processes that we will use in Montgomery County Public Schools to address compensatory recovery services for students with disabilities. In addition to myself, I wanted to let you know that there are other wonderful staff members here today that are joining us to talk about this very important topic. So besides myself, Joanne Hoffman, who you all know very, very well as a supervisor in the placement office, as well as Jonathan Langston, who is new to you. He is our Compensatory Recovery Services Coordinator, and he is so enthusiastic about helping us to create phenomenal pathways that will help us to address the compensatory recovery needs of our students, whether they be in our public schools or in our non-public settings. Also joining me today is Brenda Brown, who is my instructional specialist and assistant to me as the associate, and a newer member to our team, Diana Wiles, who is the Resolution and Compliance Supervisor. She is joining us having served as an attorney who has worked with both families and school systems in Baltimore City and in Prince George's County, and now she's supporting us in Montgomery County Public Schools. So that's the group that will be joining us today for this wonderful presentation. So Joanne, I'm going to I think we're going to transition now to the next slide where we can take a look at the outcomes. And please feel free to review those outcomes today, Joanne.
Sure. Excuse me. So we have a number of items we want to get through today and make sure we are all on the same page. The outcomes are as follows. By the end, we have reviewed the definition of compensatory recovery services. We've identified the legal requirements of CRS, reviewed the process for holding CRS meetings, reviewed the process for analyzing data to make the CRS eligibility decisions, reviewed and revised the revised CRS data entry process, and reviewed the coordination of CRS.
Thank you so very much, Joanne. If we'll go to the next slide, please. One of the most key areas around compensatory recovery services are the legal foundations. And to help us to understand those legal foundations will be Diana Wiles, who I just introduced earlier as the new supervisor for the Resolution and Compliance Unit. Diana?
Gwen, I'm going to put into the chat our frequently asked questions where the participants can record questions that they have. If you click on the Google Doc that is in the chat, it will, I'll show you what it looks like right now. It's going to look, I have to present, don't I? Cameron, could you put this up so people can see what this looks like? That's in the chat. Maybe not. Okay. Okay. So what you have is a capture sheet that you can use individually. And simply as we're going through the presentation, if you click on the tabs under the sections, it'll go right to that area and you can record your questions there. It's going to help us organize and be sure that we get to as many questions as possible this afternoon. Sorry about that, Diana.
Oh, not a problem at all. Diana actually is going to be calling in. It does appear she has a slight technical difficulty as well with her mic. So let me give her just a few minutes to join us.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can, Diana. Thank you so very much.
Okay, I apologize for that. Again, my name is Diana Wiles. I'm the supervisor for the Resolution and Compliance Unit here with Montgomery County Public Schools. What are CRS? Compensatory Recovery Services are an equitable remedy. And what that means is that the expectation is that we are trying to make our students whole. Because of the pandemic and the school closures, students have missed instruction, have regressed. And by making a student whole, it does not mean that we are giving all of the services one-to-one, hour for hour. What that means is, what can we provide the student in order to get them to progress in the way that we would have expected their progression to occur, but for the pandemic. CRS services must be provided outside of the regular school day. They cannot be provided during students' lunches, during free periods for students, study halls. They must be after school. Next slide, please. Is there a legal requirement for CRS? The United States Department of Education has mandated that all school systems that closed for a period during the global pandemic must make decisions with regard to CRS and whether or not students suffered harm for the time that the schools were forced to go into virtual learning. Because of this, IEP teams must make an individualized determination with regard to the extent to which CRS may be needed when schools have resumed normal operation. Next slide. Who determines CRS? CRS is a team decision, and it's in collaboration with the parent or guardian. To the extent that a student requires CRS, your team should be obtaining information from any service provider of the student. This may include related service providers such as speech and language therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists. It could also include a transition teacher if the student is of transition age, if the student has social, emotional, or behavioral goals and services. You would include the counselor, social worker. If the student is of age, you would include the student. The administrator or the designee, and if there's an attorney involved, MCPS attorneys would also support a meeting and discussion on CRS. Next slide, please. In what venue can the CRS decision be determined? MCPS has identified 2 venues by which we want these decisions to be made. The first is in a written agreement with the parent in collaborative discussions. In this case, your team would gather any information, any data to support a decision with regard to what the student needs for CRS. The parent would be contacted, and the parent's input would be included in making that decision. The decision would then be documented on a prior written notice. The second option is an IEP team meeting, in which you would include all of the relevant team members, and you would discuss it during an IEP team meeting. You can opt to have a separate IEP team meeting just to discuss CRS, or if you have an annual review or a reevaluation meeting, a meeting to discuss progress, you could also have that meeting and discuss CRS. The one thing we want you to be very mindful of is if you opt to have a discussion with the parent outside of the IEP team meeting, please let the parent know that they can request an IEP meeting to have the discussion. Next slide, please. Factors to consider in the CRS process. Any student who was in pre-kindergarten through high school during the closures from March 16th 2020 through June 30th, 2021 are eligible for a CRS determination. Case managers must send a copy of the parent guardian CRS letter, which should be signed by the school's principal, to all parents for whom CRS is being considered. If any of the schools have already started or did start the CRS discussions in the spring, there's a new parent or guardian letter that has been revised, and all of the information will be provided for you. For out-of-state or out-of-county move-in students, if Montgomery County, if the non-public office is placing a student who was in an out-of-state or out-of-county site during the pandemic, you will contact Jonathan Langston's office, and he will work with you to get information from that previous school or school district to support the discussion and decision with regard to CRS. Next slide. At this point, we will pause, and if there are any questions, we will answer. Having seen no questions, I'm going to turn it over to Brenda Brown, who's going to discuss data analysis in the determination of CRS.
Good afternoon, everyone. Cameron, if we could go to the next slide, please. So when we're talking about data analysis to determine compensatory recovery services, we really want to hone in on the fact that the school team needs to look for regression or an inability for that student to make progress. Perhaps an inability to provide services or accommodations during virtual instruction, any missing service, and any delays in notifying the parents or guardians of a revision or modification to an IEP, or a delay in scheduling a meeting to address parent and guardian disagreements with revisions or modifications to the IEP. It is very important to keep in mind that parent or guardian or student willingness or unwillingness to participate in virtual instruction is not a factor in establishing and determining eligibility for compensatory recovery services. If we could go to the next slide, please. So the MCPS placement specialists, in collaboration with the school teams, will be looking at a range of data in order to determine CRS eligibility. It is important that data be collected from a range of teachers, general education teachers, special education teachers, ESOL teachers, if necessary, related service providers, counselors, social workers, transition support teachers. All of those individuals, if applicable, should be involved in collecting and sharing data that will be used to determine eligibility for compensatory recovery services. Particular to that piece is also parents and guardians. So for all students pre-K through 12, report card grades, if you have some sort of learning skill grade or behavioral grade on your report card, your progress on IEP goals, virtual service logs, related service provider logs, if you still have any student work samples in their areas of goals, any informal observation information, teacher or service provider anecdotal notes, if students were in Tier 3 interventions in reading or mathematics, you would want to collect that data as well. And there's also a document that our placement specialists will be using in the CRS discussion or in the IEP team meeting. And Cameron, if you can click on that now, please. Okay, so there are basically 5 questions that the placement specialist will be asking in this discussion. And it basically asks the parent or guardian, what are their students' strengths, interests, or hobbies? And then question 2 is asking around, Cameron, could you magnify that document? Some folks are having trouble seeing it. Thank you so much. Question 2 is asking for parents' perceptions and information with regards to whether their student made progress in English language arts or mathematics, and if so, allowing them to explain what they mean. Number 3 is asking around social, emotional, behavioral skills, if their child made progress. 4 is really asking around related service providers, communication, fine motor skills, gross motor skills. And number 5 just gives the parent or guardian the opportunity to just provide any additional information, or if they would like to share work samples. So this information will be documented in the Appendix B that we will talk about in a few slides. Now, Appendix C will be used by our placement specialist as well as shared by you. And what Appendix C does is it gives teams guiding questions to consider about the data that they have regarding the student prior to COVID, during COVID, and after COVID. We need to analyze the data of all of those things that we discussed, how the child was doing before COVID, during COVID, and after COVID, to really ensure that we can make a very fulsome, informed decision as to whether or not the student is eligible for compensatory recovery services. If we could go back to the presentation and to the next slide. Thank you, Cameron. One thing that is important to note is that transition services are a part of the discussion in compensatory recovery services. If your students were receiving travel training, IEP goals that were implemented in the community, or on-site job opportunities, all of the data in the IEP and things that we talked about before need to be reviewed to make a CRS decision in that particular area. For example, can the student demonstrate those skills that were learned virtually upon return to in-person instruction? If the answer to that question is yes, through all that data review, then CRS are not warranted in transition services. If they cannot demonstrate those skills learned virtually, then that would indicate that there was a regression or a lack of FAPE, because perhaps the services could not be provided. And in that case, CRS are warranted. When we think about our soon to be graduating seniors, okay, so they're seniors now, and they spent 11 or 11 plus years in the pandemic, and they have come back and they have not been able to demonstrate these skills. There are opportunities for those seniors to have compensatory recovery services in transition. If we could move to the next. We really want to think about some additional factors to consider. If we could take a look at Appendix B. Our placement specialist, after gathering all of that pre, during, and post data, will be completing the Appendix B for each student and documenting their guiding questions and documenting all of the data that is necessary regarding the CRS decisions in all of the goal areas. So if a student has goals in transition, in reading, in writing, in math, in occupational therapy, and etc., all of those data points, pre, during, and post, will be analyzed. The information from the parent guardian guiding questions will be included here as well, and the team will work through the decision. So if you want to stop right there, thank you, Cameron. This is where you will be doing the impact analysis. And on the bottom, it says, was the student negatively impacted? And you can ask that question by goal area. Was Brenda negatively impacted from her reading goals, her writing goals, her speech goals, and etc.? And then if the team says yes on any one of those goals, they would go down and complete parts 3 and parts 4 of this document. In part 3, you're going to indicate the area of impact, and you can always add lines here, and you are going to identify the amount of CRS, the frequency, the duration, and the provider, okay? And then you want to think about the setting. And then you want, in part 4, you're going to indicate the date of the decision, whether it was an IEP team meeting, was it a parent guardian discussion, or was it a settlement agreement? If we could go back to the presentation, please, Cameron, thank you. So this is what I just described. You're going to review the data in part 2. You're going to identify if there was an impact. You are then, if there is an impact, you're going to complete parts 3 and 4. If no impact was indicated by the data review, you're just going to complete part 4. But in both cases, the team must document their decision on a prior written notice. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mason to really give us the grounding in how we might determine the service hours for compensatory recovery services. Thank you very much, Brenda. We've given you the legal foundations, and now you understand the data that you're supposed to use to make a determination whether or not the student is eligible. But frequently, IEP teams experience some difficulty trying to come up with the remedy. In other words, the number of sessions or the hours that should be provided to accommodate the loss of instruction and the regression that a student has experienced. For our students who are in non-public settings, we certainly know several things about them. Some are there because of social emotional needs. And so subsequently, the logs that you have about those students and the progress that they were making from a social emotional perspective, if you served them prior to the closure of schools in March 2020, and then they return to you with in-person learning, you obviously have some information that indicates how those students have made a social emotional adjustment. Clearly, by consulting with the psychologist or your mental health team, your licensed clinical social workers, you all will make a recommendation in terms of how many hours of service that student might require to regain some of the loss that they experienced in the area of their social emotional regression. But one thing is for certain, that in addition to their social emotional needs, we know that many of our students are served by you because they have deficits in the area of reading and mathematics. And we know that even prior to the pandemic and the closure of schools, many times our students would take several months to really begin to even demonstrate that they were making some progress towards the attainment of that particular goal or objective. Some students have taken as much as 4 months. Some students have taken as much as 5 months, 6 months, 7 months, just to be able to demonstrate some degree of progress. And so what I would want you to do is to think about it in these terms. If it's taken a student, for example, 5 months, this is prior to the closure of schools, to make progress towards their goals and objectives on an IEP, that equates roughly to what, about 20 to 25 weeks. And that would equate then to the number of sessions that you could recommend. You might recommend 25 hourly sessions on a weekly basis in one of the content areas. Or you might recommend, depending upon the student and their capacity to work one-on-one, you might recommend 30 minutes. And then the time span would, of course, be longer because you've reduced the incremental amount of time in which the services have been provided. So again, think very hard about the students, how long it really takes for them to demonstrate some level of degree of progress, and then equate that in terms of the number of hours. And that will help you to come up with, I believe, to be a reasonable remedy. There will still be parents who may think again that their child is entitled to every minute, every hour, and every second that services were missed or not provided with the degree of fidelity that they would have been provided had the closure of schools not existed. And as Diana Wiles stated earlier, it is not minute for minute, hour for hour, or second for second. Now, over the years, I've been in hundreds of IEP meetings, and I've done many, many compensatory recovery services discussions. I've never been in a meeting in which 200 hours of services were recommended or 100 hours of service. But um, if we find ourselves being in that situation where a parent or advocate is requesting that level of support for their child, our resolution and compliance unit with Diana Wiles will be a resource, certainly to our placement specialists, to help to resolve those kinds of differences as it relates to the recommended hours of service. So I hope that by thinking about the student in terms of the amount of time that it takes for them to make progress, and then equating that in terms of hours, and then utilizing those weeks over a period of, let's say, 25 weeks. It could be 30 weeks, it could be 40 weeks, but you just need to quantify it based upon your knowledge about that student. So I hope that helps you as placement specialists and also as team members as you're thinking about the needs, of your students. So I want to thank you so very much for the opportunity to talk to you about CRS service hour determination. We'll go to the next slide to see if we have at this time any questions.
I have a question for Brenda, specifically in reference to the transition services and the community-based instruction and travel training. Many of our schools have yet to resume those activities in the community because of COVID. And I don't know what the timeline is. What are your thoughts about how we address those kinds of issues when these meetings do start? So we can't get the rate of progress now because they're not back to post. They're still in, I guess, past because they haven't been able to experience it since they've come back.
So one of the things that I would definitely suggest, we can go back and collaborate with Simone Guinness, our transition supervisor, but I would also think about what are some of the transition services that could be implemented in the school. Could we do travel training around the grounds of the school or getting from place X to Y to Z in the school? And if they're not able to go to, for an example, outside job placements, are there job placements in the school? So those are the types of things that I would encourage our non-public partners. If I'm sure you've probably already thought about some of the things I'm already saying, but if not, that's how I would support the thinking and share the information with our office in MCPS. But definitely, I will go back and collaborate with Simone Guinness and provide a more detailed description of information and things that we may need to consider.
George, I was going to also add to that the non-public providers probably have a pretty good sense about the skill set of these individual students in that area of transition, and that they probably have a sense that student is likely going to need compensatory services to support them again in regaining those skills linked to those community-related activities. And so I do feel that the team can certainly go forward and also with the data that they have, make some recommendations so that when they decide to resume specifically out to the community, then we can then think through how we would support those students with their compensatory recovery services. And also keep in mind that for some of the students, if it is appropriate, we know that some of the non-publics may not be able to provide the actual compensatory recovery service because of their distance and proximity to Montgomery County Public Schools. which is why our compensatory services coordinator has joined us, because we will work with the placement unit and the non-publics to create some of those compensatory recovery services opportunities within the structures that we're creating within our public setting as well. And so when Jonathan gets to that point, he can explain that even more. But we're factoring in the fact that we know, because of the distance and the commitment of staff beyond the duty day in the non-public schools, it might be difficult to implement some of these compensatory services. So we're looking forward to how we can partner to coordinate that as well. Are there any other questions, Joanne, from what you can see?
Joanne, I can take it. Dr. Mason and
Yes.
Brenda, there are a couple of questions. What information should we be using when we have students who are new to our school, either during or post-COVID closures? How do we compare what they are doing now to what they were doing before when they were not with us?
So we did speak to, are these students new to you, and they were somewhere before, be it out of state or in a maybe a comprehensive school within another county? For those students, our placement specialists will be reaching out to Jonathan Langsam, and because we will have the information from the previous IEP where they were, in Riverside County, California, and he will be able to liaise with that school system to get the data that we will need to see how a child was doing there. Or if, for an example, you just got a student from a comprehensive school in Montgomery County Public Schools, he will be able to get you that information so that you will be able to do, the placement specialist will get that information from Jonathan so that you will be able to do the pre and during COVID analysis. And if the child has just come to you newly, you would have the observational data, the anecdotal data, the quarterly progress on goals data to really analyze the after COVID impact. Okay.
So we do have a number of questions under data analysis, and I'll read one of the first ones here. How are the guiding questions different from the questionnaire we already sent home?
So they are somewhat different, but we are using these parent guardian questions from this point onward, and we're not sending them home. We are having that discussion in the meeting. One of the things that we found was we sent them home and we didn't get the information back, and so we didn't get as much parent guardian involvement in the discussion. So we are going to be, from now on, when we're having those discussions, we are using the parent guardian questions in the context of the meeting. Okay. We're just going to take one more question, and all of these questions we will respond and complete the frequently asked questions document, and it will be shared with Joanne to share with all of the individuals on this call.
Okay, and I'm just going to choose another one, not exactly in order, but I have a student who was not progressing on his goals, and for a number of reasons changed to a certificate. Do we go back and provide CRS on the goals despite they were determined not appropriate?
So just let me restate, the child was pursuing grade level outcomes when they initially came to the non-public?
Yes, that's how I'm
And
reading
then
it.
in the course of this, was this prior to the pandemic or during the pandemic? So I
Yeah,
don't,
maybe.
this question, I don't think that we have
Right.
enough information right here and right now to answer it. So I would
Okay.
invite the person who typed that question to maybe provide more in-depth detail so that we can answer it in a way that is going to be most helpful to you, but more particularly most helpful to that student and his or her family.
So Brenda, this is Lisa Davison. I wrote the question, so I will write you separately. And
Oh, that's
seek
great, Lisa.
guidance.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Cameron, let us move on to the next section. We're going to be talking about data. Data collection and accountability, as we as special educators know that that is a very common practice in our field of special education, and compensatory recovery services are no different. In Montgomery County Public Schools, we began the data collection process last summer for our public school system, and we now have a system to collect our non-public school student data. As you may be aware, the Maryland State Department of Education recently issued guidance defining the accountability and data requirements and deadlines for data submission for compensatory recovery services. So as a result, the Division of Business, Fiscal, and Information Services team developed a data collection tool so that we would be able to accurately document the data and the efforts of teams for each student with disabilities in our public and non-public schools. The MCPS placement specialists will be responsible for the completion and updating of these forms, but we wanted to share the process with all of our non-public partners as well so that you would gain an understanding of what is required. So if we could go to the next slide. So based on the data set we got on October the 4th, there are currently 581 non-public school students with disabilities who need to be considered for eligibility of compensatory recovery services. And as I mentioned, MSDE did give us some due dates and deadline dates. We must have all 581 of our non-public student records to be updated by June the 1st, 2022. If our students in our non-public schools have already been considered for CRS during the last school year ending June of 2021, we do not need for those students to be reconsidered. It is just the students who have not yet been considered. Okay? So I'm going to turn it over to another presenter, Cameron Gudajnia, one of our awesome technological people in our Division of Business and Fiscal and Information Services, to really review the components of the data collection form.
Thank you, Brenda. Hi, everyone. My name is Cameron, and I've assisted in creating this tool for everyone to use that should be super intuitive and very friendly. So this is the non-public student list of all the students in non-public schools who will be considered or who have yet to be considered for CRS. So in this list, you'll find all the students' IDs, their grade, their school contact, and whether or not they should fill out this form. As of this current moment, everyone should have to fill out a form. So you'll see a hyperlink named Google Form right by their information. So I'm going to begin by showing you guys the search tool for this. So it's going to be a quick Control F on your keyboard. That'll populate a search bar over here. You're going to have to identify the student's ID in order to locate their record. So in this example, I have named my student's ID 111111, and you'll see that it's populated over here in green. You'll see that my student is in first grade over here at this school, and the school contact is named test. So I'm going to find this Google form. I'm going to hover over it and select the hyperlink, and the hyperlink will take me to a pre-populated form that shows my student's ID, their first and last name, their school contact, and the rest of the fields are for you to verify and fill out. So I'm going to say my student is in first grade, the school name, choose the special ed program, and then this final question will guide you either into the next form or it'll submit the form for you and you'll be completed. So if you do select yes to the question, is the student eligible for CRS, you will be guided to the following page. If you select any of the answers below, you're going to have to submit the form as there won't be a second page to fill out. So I'm going to click yes over here and then click next. And when I click next, you'll get another form. and it'll ask you who's providing CRS. And in this example, I'll say a school-based staff member. The next question asks you the type of CRS provided or soon to be provided, and you can check all that apply. And then down below will be the section where you enter in all of the planned service hours for each subject. So you'll see math receipts, reading, writing, and so forth. So in this example, I'm just going to say that the test student will require 20 hours. And as of this moment, they've only received 5. Total hours of reading planned, I'm going to say that they have currently gotten 0, and they're not going to receive any. So I'm going to type in NA for both the planned and the receive section. And then just for the purpose of this, I'm just going to continue by writing NA in, as all of these fields are required. But you'll see all the different subjects as we continue to go down. And although we've created this tool for case managers, service providers are able to go in here, add their student, make a selection for the hours that they have provided or are currently providing, and then they'll be able to submit the form at the end. So as we get towards the end of the form, you'll see a couple of more questions. And finally, you'll have a question at the bottom that asks you, if you're a case manager, please complete this question. It says case managers only over here, and it's, has a student completed all CRS? In this case, we know that this student has only completed 5 of their 20 math hours, so we're going to say no. If you're a case manager, please ignore this question. So I'm going to hit submit, and it says my response has been recorded. I can click on this blue button and edit my responses. But on the flip side, if I go to my email, I will get a form response sheet that shows me what I've written down. So you'll see over here, if I go down below, I've made all of these changes for my student, and they're all here. Now let's say I've completed 15 hours of my math now, or let's say 20. Click edit response over there. It'll take me back to my form. I can hit next because all this information is still the same. I can go back down to my math, and I can say the student has now received all 20 hours. And if this is the only service that we're providing for the student, as the case manager, I'm able to go down to the end of this page and now change my answer from no to yes. And once you click submit, you're all good to go for the student. And that is the process and instructions to filling out a CRS form. So I'm just going to reiterate the steps for you. Over here, you'll see you're going to have to locate the Google Sheet. It's by selecting this hyperlink or the link that we'll provide for you. And then you're going to make sure you're going to go to step 2 and click Control F onto your keyboard on the keyboard to populate the search bar in Google Sheets. That was that little bar on the top right side of the screen. Step 3, once the student is located, you're going to check the Google Form column to see if the student needs to submit a Google Form. If a new form is needed, the Google Form hyperlink will be available. In the case at this very moment, all students will have to complete a form, so you will see Google Form there. And then below that, it says if a new form is not needed, it'll say no form needed, and we won't see that for this particular example. And then lastly, step 4, once submitted, you'll receive an email to your account with your submission. And if you need to make any changes, you can click on the edit response button shown in the email and then resubmit at the end. So now I'm going to pass this back over to Brenda, who'll continue talking about the important dates to remember. Oh, I'm sorry. I have one more slide. Again, just to reiterate, this is a static sheet. If a student is not receiving hours for a particular subject, please write NA in both the planned and received section. If a student is receiving or plans to receive hours, please write a numerical value for the planned and received section. Now I'm going to pass it over to Brenda, who will speak about the important dates to remember.
Thank you, Cameron. So it's going to be important for our MCPS placement specialists to not only understand how to complete the Google form, because you are the ones that are going to be completing it, but also to be aware of the following important dates as they relate to the CRS data collection tool. There are due dates and deadline dates, followed by a blackout period for internal reconciliation and reporting to MSDE. The data is cumulative to MSDE so that by June the 3rd, 2022, which is the deadline for all of our data, we will be able to completely upload and share the data that we have for all of our students with disabilities, both in MCPS and in schools with our non-public partners. The Division of Business, Fiscal, and Information Systems will compile the data even if there are multiple entries. So for an example, Lisa Davison entered, the initial information about a student. Gwen is supposed to get 20 hours in writing. And then she comes back and says, oh, okay, now Gwen's gotten 10 hours of writing. So as the form is updated, the Division of Business, Fiscal, and Information Services will crunch all of the data for Gwen so that it will be sent in one file to MSDE. Okay. One thing to note, that as of the December 1st, 2021 accountability deadline with MSDE, that will be the first submission of data related to our non-public school students with disabilities. If you could move to the next slide, please. To our placement specialists, if you need any assistance or have any questions about this form, please contact our awesome, super awesome technology team, either Tyler, Cameron, or Derek via email. And if we could move along, it is once again our checkpoint to identify if there are any questions, particularly from our placement staff members regarding the input and use of the form. Our non-public partners will not be entering this information, but we did want to show you the process that we're going to go through to capture that data. So do we have any questions, Joanne?
Yes. So the first one, and I think you just answered these, but to be clear, students where the CRS discussion was completed after June 2021 until today, the discussion needs to be done again, or we just need to put this information in the data collection form?
So if, again, I'm going to use Meredith. Meredith did Gwen's meeting on May the 20th, 2021. At that point, there was no form to enter, okay? You do not need to go back and hold the decision because the decision stands, but we will need you to enter Gwen's data from May 20th, 2021 into that form.
Brenda, thank you for clarifying that, because I wanted to reiterate that we already have submitted the first data set required by MSDE, but we did not have data at that time that included non-public discussions and outcomes. So it is going to be important that the question that was just asked and answered by Brenda helps to address the fact we want to make sure we have an accurate record. The other thing I wanted to reiterate is that if you looked at those dates, we're really working toward making sure that the discussions and the determinations are made. This does not mean that the services have to all be provided. And I want to be really clear about that. This is really about documenting that we've had the determination meetings and the status of those determination meetings. It is not a document to indicate that every single service has been provided. Okay, and I'll let you go to other questions, Joanne.
And there really was, at this point, I think there was just one other. Hold on one moment. Will non-public staff members have access to this form? There was a mention related service providers being able to enter data.
Yes, this form is only for Montgomery County Public Schools staff members. So in the collection of the data, the MCPS placement specialist will be collaborating with the related service providers. In that discussion, remember we talked about in the discussion in the IEP meeting, in the completion of the Appendix B And then, that information will be entered on the form. And depending on who is giving, let's say, for example, there's a speech language pathologist. The decision will have to be, is the non-public going to provide the speech? Or is it going to be provided through a route through one of the MCPS pathways? Because if it's being provided through one of the MCPS pathways, that MCPS staff member will be working with the placement specialist to update the form. Okay, does that get at the question? And we will be providing written responses to all of these questions. Okay?
And I just wanted to say also to the wonderful non-public placement specialists that, Cameron and Tyler and Derek are all a part of our team. Any additional follow-up professional learning needed around the use of this tool is accessible to you. Just simply make that request.
So if there aren't any more questions, I'm going to turn it over to the lovely, the talented Joanne Hoffman.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to next steps. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. Now that we've discussed the process for considering eligibility and you've been introduced to the CRS data collection tool for documenting eligibility decision, the service and delivery method, we're ready to summarize the steps that need to be followed to complete this process. Placement specialists will start by scheduling the IEP meeting or the CRS parent discussion for those students who have not yet had that CRS eligibility determination. Take the steps necessary to schedule that meeting or discussion with the parents and guardians. Use the CRS discussion script linked here. I'm going to show that in a second. When you're having a discussion with parents and guardians, we're going to pull that open. Thank you, Cameron, and maybe just a little bit larger. It's important to follow this script. Is really to ensure that we are providing the parent the opportunity to have this discussion in the context of an IEP meeting, if that is their preference. Okay. As you engage in the scheduling process, determine if there are cases that may require the presence of a central office staff member, so you can coordinate that support with your special education area or program supervisor. An example would be a meeting when you've already received input from the parent that an attorney or advocate will be present, and you feel that support will be needed. Okay. And again, placement specialists, you're used to this process all the time with meetings, reaching out to me or someone in the Office of General Counsel for support. Next slide, please. Okay. Excuse me. While scheduling the CRS meeting, be sure to communicate with all the necessary service providers, considering the need for an interpreter or use of the language line if necessary. Excuse me. In collaboration, make sure you're collaborating with all the service providers and teachers to complete Appendix B for each student being considered. Conduct the meeting using the information documented in Appendix B and the parent-guardian input as your guide. Hold the IEP meeting or discussion. Make the eligibility determination in all the collaboration that you've gotten. Complete a prior written notice form using the example in the link and the presentation as a guide. We're going to open those in just a moment. Please make sure that you are completing all key elements in the prior written notice. This is the document that records the discussion that will be provided to the parents. So we're going to open up. Thank you. This is just an example or a guide template for the prior written notice when a student is found eligible for CRS. Okay. Let's take a look at that a little bit more closely. I'm going to just point out a couple of things on there. You're going to indicate the type of meeting by selecting the other and adding that this is a CRS eligibility meeting. It has that listed there for you on the bottom there. Describe the action being taken by documenting if the student was determined to be eligible for CRS and provide a summary of those services. explain why this action is being taken by describing the data that was used to make the decision, and provide a detailed description of each service that is being offered. Under the description of evaluation methods, list all the data measures that were reviewed. Under other factors, describe the discussion that took place with a parent and document any agreements or disagreements. If the parent declines or rejects the team's offer, document any relevant information that may have been shared during the discussion. Finally, upload the completed Appendix B to the student's MOIEP profile. Okay. And did you want to take a further look at the form here, or most of you should be pretty familiar with something like this. If you think back to when we were doing individual distance learning plans, it is pretty much, it's all set up just like you would for prior written notice for any other meeting. What data did you look at? How did you make the decision? And what will be provided or not provided? Okay. And we can go ahead and close that and go back to the presentation. Okay. So after you're finished, and we're going to go ahead to the next slide, Cameron. Perfect. Thank you. After the CRS meeting or discussion, you will need to provide the parents with all the relevant documentation within 5 days. Those documents will include the IEP 5-day verification letter, a copy of the prior written notice, and a copy of the Appendix B. After the determination, you will need to use the CRS data collection tool to document the outcome of the eligibility decision and the services that are being recommended. The final step is extremely important. This is how we will know that an eligibility determination has been made for a student, and this information will help communicate the need for central office support with the delivery of those CRS services. Of course, there always may be circumstances where you need to refer a parent or a guardian to the resolution and compliance unit for the consideration of CRS. Those situations would include a request for reimbursement of services the parent has already paid for privately or intends to provide privately, when there is a request for an additional year of instruction beyond the age of 21, or when the parent is requesting access to services that are outside the scope of the CRS delivery pathways described in this training. And you're going to get a copy of this presentation, but there's the contact information for the resolution and compliance unit. As previously discussed, the MSDE has established a process for monitoring the progress that all the local school systems are making with the eligibility consideration for CRS and the delivery of those services. This is one of the many reasons why it is very important that you complete the CRS data collection tool. Of course, the primary reason for engaging in this process is to ensure that we are providing the appropriate services for special education students who are negatively impacted by the events of the past school year. It is the expectation that all of these CRS eligibility determinations, not services, will be completed by March 31st, 2022. Excuse me. Right. Where are we here? Let's see. Okay. Sorry. Okay. And there's a list of resources that will also be provided. We've gone over these. We've opened them up for you, but it is also attached here through the PowerPoint presentation. You will also be having a recorded version of the presentation that is going to be provided to you through our non-public administrators folder on Google. And I just want to see at this point, we'll just take a stop and do a check about if there's any questions that I can answer at this point in time regarding those last components.
Joanne, there is one question in the
Okay.
document.
Perfect.
Are all the CRS discussion calls to be done by the placement specialist, or can they be done by school staff in collaboration with the placement specialist? So the answer to that question is yes and yes. The placement specialist is the driver of either the discussions, but they will be held, the data collection would be held in collaboration with the school staff. And when you're having the discussion, I would seriously hope and expect that the placement specialist and somebody from the school would be having that discussion with the parent. If it is in the context of an IEP team meeting, the placement specialist would be there, as well as the non-public school team members would be there. Okay, I hope that answers that question.
And I didn't see another question at that time. No, I think that one was the only one. Okay. So I'm going to turn this back over to, is it Jonathan Langston?
It is.
Okay.
Thank you, Joanne. I appreciate it. First, before I get into I just have a couple slides with you. So I want to take a minute to introduce myself to you all and just say a couple things. One, my name is Jonathan Langston, and I'm our CRS coordinator here in Montgomery County Public Schools. I want to make sure you all are comfortable to know that I can be a point of contact for you all in all aspects of service delivery, service coordination. We're developing a lot of creative and I think a lot of dynamic ideas and approaches and pathways to deliver services. So it's exciting for me to be creative and to work with this kind of end of the project. And I really look forward to connecting with each and every one of your schools, meeting you all, hearing your ideas, and really supporting the coordination. I just want to make sure you're feeling comfortable that it's a partnership, really, for all of us to work together. And I approach it this way. And so I really hope that I'll get to know you and work with you and support your endeavors. A little of my background is I worked in a couple of non-publics early on in my career. I spent some time at the Rich School, which was at the old Charter Behavioral Health Hospital building. Spent a few years there. And then blessed, really, I got hired at the Frost Center in Rockville and was able to work there for 10 years and really learned so many neat and awesome ways to approach special education, which services me very well to today. So just wanted to share that a little bit with you. I don't know if I have some friends in the room that might know me from my past careers. If I'm seeing you again, it's fabulous to see you again. And I can't wait to reconnect with you. I want to talk a little bit about our coordination of service. So the deadline for our CRS provision plans is November 5th. So we want you to submit your plans by November 5th for your students that are going to receive CRS. And like I said earlier, I expect to work collaboratively with you all to coordinate services, either through your end and supporting you all on your end, or also welcoming students into our processes here in Montgomery County. If we could go to the next slide.
Jonathan, I wanted to just jump in real quickly about the service, about the plans that are due to me tomorrow. It's really, please don't stress out a whole lot about this.
Too. I probably misspoke that. Thank you, Joanne. No, please correct that.
No, that's fine. What I wanted to say to our non-public administrators is we're really looking at a framework or an outline of how you and your school would be able or could be able to provide services. So if you're looking at academics, what are you thinking in terms of how you're going to provide those? Are you thinking, half day, when you have your half day staff development, are you going to have those times also for compensatory services? Are you going to implement social, emotional, and behavioral goals and objectives? How are you thinking about transition? All those pieces. And if you are stuck on, we just don't have anybody who can do those pieces, or we could do something one Saturday a month, just be very, honest, so we know how we need to collaborate and how we can support.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I definitely don't want anything I'm saying today to raise the temperature of anybody's anxiety as well. So I appreciate that clarification, Joanne, very much, because that was not my intent there. So I want to talk a little bit about some of our pathways and some of the things that we'll have available for your schools to engage in us and our processes here and ways we can support, kind of like what Ms. Hoffman was just saying. So we're going to be opening up regional sites or centers, if you will, throughout Montgomery County. We have 4 strategically placed centers. There's the Little Bennett Elementary School, which is up north. We have 2 schools here in Rockville that we'll be using, Julius West Middle School, which is on one side of the city, and our Rock Terrace School, which is on a different side of the city. And we'll also be using Eastern Middle School, which is on the other side of University Boulevard. We're really excited about these locations and the ability to offer services on the weekends with providers. It's a fabulous, I think, option for families. It's also a fabulous option for some of our providers that would rather do this on the weekend maybe than during the week or during busier times. So we are hoping that you all will engage within our centers. And I know that more information or how we can connect in that process will be coming. We will have at our sites coordinators, school staff, teachers, paraeducators working at the centers. And the procedures will be, checking students and providers in, providing space, and documenting the encounter and the services that are being delivered. So I'm very excited about the centers, how they can function in very creative ways to really meet the needs, the many needs that we're gonna be identifying for CRS, and that includes all the areas of social emotional learning, as well as academic areas. So I know that we're going to be collaborating more on accessing our service centers. It was also mentioned earlier that you may not have staff available that can provide CRS at the school level at your locations. We are developing a bank of providers here in our central office that we can match to students. We're calling that CRS by appointment. And I know that there will be a mechanism for you to tap into that support and let us know when a student needs to be matched with a provider. So we're excited as well that we have a bank of about almost 225 staff members right now on our provider list, and we are actively matching providers with students as we speak. Kind of our system around that is we're going to have a master database of students, and providers are going to be able to go onto that database and pick the students that they would like to work with. So I know we'll be hearing more about adding your students into this the way that we're doing the work, so that we can match them with providers and support those students on your level as well. This also includes related services, such as speech, OT, and other related services that our students will be receiving, either identified in the non-public area through providers at your end, but like I said, also through providers through Montgomery County Public Schools. If we could go to the next slide. And so that was my very brief presentation. As you can see, our main contacts are Miss Joanne Hoffman, who's our supervisor, myself, that's going to really just be our CRS coordinator and support, and then Diana Wiles, who you guys heard from as well, who leads our legal team. So I think we're going to be your main contacts as we move forward. And I'm very much looking forward to working with all of you and welcoming you into our process and collaborating with you. I'm sure there's some questions.
And currently there's one, and this is almost a follow-up from the previous meeting we had last month. There was a question about whether there can be reimbursement available for staff and parents that have to transport their students or go to another location to provide services. And I'll let Gwen answer that.
So thank you so very much, because I did want to follow up on those great questions that were asked when we met the last time. We will provide mileage reimbursement to our families who are having difficulty getting access to the locations that we may have to provide within the county that Ms. Langsam is coordinating. So we will help to support that particular service. and we will reimburse parents for that. I know there was also a question about the non-public staff members. So for example, Jonathan, there may be some non-public staff members who, let's say, for example, live in an area that are close to some of the regional sites, and they are interested in being available to a student locally. Would we provide mileage for those individuals? And, my answer is going to be yes to that question as well. There was also another question that was asked at our last meeting, and that was, when is the school system expected to have completed not the discussions and the determination meetings, but the actual delivery of services? And so Diana Wiles, our resolution compliance supervisor, and I have been working on that particular item. And Diana, I know you're still there. I'd like for you to respond to that, please. Diana, are you still connecting up? There you are. There you go.
Okay, thank you. So from the time that you make the decision on compensatory recovery services, we're looking at about an 18-month period where students may have been either at home on virtual learning or in some type of hybrid program. And that is the recommended time that we're giving parents to make their students available for the services. So 18 months from the date that you all make the decision as to the number of compensatory recovery services hours that the student is going to receive. And the reason why we're using that number is because it's similar to how MSDE calculates the amount of time if there's a state complaint. It's typically a year to complete any compensatory services, but because of the extended time the students were out or were not, or were in a hybrid model, we have agreed to an 18-month period. So it would be important to let the parents know that, so that they are aware that the services can be extended, but not extended too far out in advance.
Thank you so very much, Diana, for answering that question. Joanne, do you see any other questions or comments?
Probably back further in the beginning of the presentation.
And what we'll do, we'll come back, we'll review those internally and definitely get those responses provided.
There is one important one here. Should the CRS plan be submitted to our placement specialist or directly to Joanne? Please submit to me. I'll be the recipient of all the plans. Thank you.
There is one question that I'm seeing in the legal foundations. Please clarify age K to high school that qualify. What about PHS students? I don't know what PHS students mean. So if you could spell that out, that would help us to be able to respond accurately to that question. Thank you.
Joanne, is that simply post high school 18 to 21?
I would assume so.
Yes.
Okay.
Similar to our other students who are 18 to 21. And so, yes. And so the response is that it encompasses, even though our statement did say high school, it is intended for all students with disabilities who are in school, who were adversely impacted, again, through age 21.
I do have a question. I'm not sure if it's appropriate at this time or not, but it's about students' refusal of services. If a high school student and some of my kids with emotional disabilities will say, I'm not going to school on Saturdays, I'm not, whatever it might be, if they refuse the services, what do we do?
Diana, would you speak to that from a legal perspective?
Sure, and if I can just clarify the question, are you referring to if they refuse the CRS services or if they refuse during COVID to log on to virtual learning?
I apologize, CRS services.
Okay, so all the tutor can do is make the attempt to provide the services. And that should be documented. If the attempt, for example, if they're meeting at a library, I don't think the expectation is that the tutor would show up every Saturday for 10 weeks, knowing that the student is not going to participate. However, the first or perhaps the second week, the tutor may arrive and the student is not there. They should document. Subsequently, they may want to try to reach the student by phone or reach the parent by phone, find out if the student intends to participate, and if they don't, continue to document. The reason why the documentation is important is because parents may come back later and request that the services be provided. And we want to have that documentation that we made every attempt to provide the services to the students.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Well, if there are not, I would certainly like to thank first and foremost all of our non-public partners. You are clearly an extension to our MCPS family. You serve the students that we have demonstrated that we don't have the capacity to serve. You provide a wonderful set of services. You are collaborative and you have been wonderful partners over the years. And so I want to thank you so very much for that relationship that we have. We hope that this presentation today has been helpful to you in terms of the processes that MCPS will utilize to comply with what the U.S. Department of Education has required and also what the Maryland State Department of Education has required. To be very honest, we're just really doing good work. We're trying to mitigate the learning loss that our children with disabilities have experienced. And the data that we have indicates, as we look at it from our perspective at MCPS, that our students were significantly impacted by the loss of direct in-person instruction. And so it's really an obligation that we have to make sure that we make good decisions about the areas where they need compensatory recovery services and that we provide those services to help them with the impact of their learning loss. So I want to thank you for all that you do each and every day. To the wonderful non-public placement specialist, staff coordinator, to Joanne and your team, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for what you do to support these students. Your knowledge and your expertise is incredible. And I want you to know that while there is information that was shared again today by Cameron, that we are here for you. We'll provide additional presentations or support. Joanne can easily arrange that for you. So we want you to feel supported in that way. And Jonathan, we look forward again to the work that you will have with the non-public office and with our non-public providers to help us to meet the needs of these students. So to everyone, it looks like we've ended early. It's something called a gift of time. Enjoy it. And I will see you the next time. Thank you so very much, everyone. Bye-bye.